I think within like the last maybe few years, I mean, actually, I want to kind of get to this now because obviously the government's been very tight-lipped about UFOs and UAPs. But in 2020, the Pentagon formally released 3 videos that were previously reported by the New York Times in 2017, dubbed simply the Pentagon UFO videos. I know you've seen these because you've reported on them. But for those who are not familiar, they're visual recordings of cockpit instrumentation displays from U.S. Navy fighter jets based aboard the aircraft carriers of the USS Nimitz and the USS Theodore Roosevelt in 2005.
Yep.
2004
and 15.
I'm sorry, yeah. 2004, 2014, and then 2015. And it shows obviously some strange activity, these UAPs, the unidentified aerial phenomena. First of all, what can you tell us about these videos?
Yeah, well, there's more photos and videos important from other incidents as well, going back to the 80s at least, and essentially it's the pilots from the Carrier Air Wings are flying around doing their training exercises off the east and west coasts on pre-deployment, which is their workups before they go away to the South China Sea or the Persian Gulf. They requalify so that, the carrier is ready to operate in a war setting if it needed to. So it's basically training exercises.
Sure.
When they're doing it, they're flying around, and the radar controllers on the surface warfare ships and the cruisers send out, go to this area because we have a radar detection. It's weird, behavior patterns, 80,000 to 20,000. The pilots go there. These things then maneuver either alongside or against them in some cases. 2015, they see what the pilot describes as a sphere within a cube. The Tic Tacs in 2004.
Yeah, the Tic Tac, yeah.
And then, end of 2019, which I wrote about, and really Tim McMillan at the debrief kind of, I would say, broke the story on, is they had a triangle that came out of
like a Dorito chip.
Yeah, why not? Yeah,
I mean, that's why some people have likened it to.
And so you've got these different shape sizes, again, near the nuclear reactors, which is the government, that's classified. The government classifies that because they don't want
anyone to know where
they don't want to figure out. Yeah, they don't want the Russians and Chinese to realize, which they already do, that these things are detecting nuclear reactors and closing with them with impunity.
Right.
So the concern is credible. I think the reaction to it is not credible because it's, but yeah. So this is a continuing thing. There's other footage, I think, going back, really again to the Second World War that's been classified because they don't know what the hell it is and they don't want to scare people. But really, it's just extraordinary machinery flying around.
Right.
And top line, that's really what we know. But
I mean, the one thing that stands out, and I think this is what one of the fighter pilots was talking about, is that the propulsion system, the system in which it actually gets from point A to point B, or just simply travels through a particular medium, was unlike anything he's ever seen before because of it was like traveling at how many knots underwater?
Hundreds
of knots underwater, and then it just shoots up vertically without in moving through a medium without any way to sort of propel it in that way.
Yeah, so the 2004, probably talking about David Fravor, who's the
Fravor,
commander, very well-regarded pilot, and it's a great PBS documentary that came out with his deployment. It shows just how good a pilot he is, and nothing about UFOs, but he's a serious guy.
Right. Certainly not a tinfoil hat
wearing. And the other pilots are serious. You don't pay people to fly those fighter jets and land on aircraft carriers that sometimes are in dark, stormy waters. What happens if you crash that jet into the con tower? You've got hundreds of dead people. What happens if a pilot goes insane and decides to go and bomb New York? You've got a problem, right?
Yeah,
These
absolutely.
are not silly.
These are people
who've gone through a lot of psychological and physical testing, repeatedly.
Right.
And that's so important to emphasize because it disabuses the notion, I think, in a forensic way, of this being delusion.
Right.
That
It's a
trained
credible
observer.
source.
Yeah, you've got to, again, think about you have an unidentified contact that most of the time maybe it's a civilian aircraft or maybe it's, an enemy drone.
Yeah.
You want to make a decision quickly before it gets too close to the carrier in case it sinks the carrier of what it is. So they're trained to observe. But in the 2004 incident, that there was underwater detection from the sonar systems, but I don't know if David Fravor was at least aware of that at the time. I don't think he was, and the other pilots in the squadron who went up. But yeah, these things are detected doing under the water, in air, no apparent, the amount of G's that they're pulling. Would, based on our understanding of aerodynamics, physics, rip a body apart. So, and then how do you go hundreds of knots under the water because of the friction? How do you go thousands of miles an hour instantaneously So the capability, it's an unconventional propulsion method,
right?
As a given, I think. I think there's pretty good analysis that the military has done in the last few years as to what that propulsion is.
What did they think? Or what have you heard?
The top line, which I think is probably the most credible, as extraordinary as it sounds, is some kind of way of warping the space-time metric, which sounds ridiculous.
Yeah,
and
like out of a sci-fi movie.
That essentially you are creating an environment around the craft in which you can move in a way that allows you to significantly mitigate the impacts of Earth's gravity or friction around you. Right. But essentially, the best way of looking at it might be if you put, something in a bubble in the water, right, in the bathtub, and if you could put something in the middle of a bubble and it sort of comes up to the surface. That thing in the bubble is not really being impacted by the friction because it's sort of moving through. It's not a great example, but it's a sort of
Is it at all possible, like moving in a vacuum?
Yeah, but that right, but it's it's more than that in terms of the energy required to do this stuff, as we understand it, gets into kind of quantum mechanics, and I quite carefully now try and say. That's about all I know because I'm not great at physics, and you don't want to get it wrong. But it requires huge amounts of energy, at least as we understand it. So it's compelling, very compelling. But one of the things that drives the analysis of that, for example, which hasn't been, something I've sort of tried to work on a bit, or am working on a bit, is the degree to which when our aircraft, ground radar, whatever the sensor platform is, satellite, infrared, pilot, gun camera, sonar, whatever it is, depending on how close you get to, let's say this is the radar site and this is the object. If the object's here, or let's say that the radar on the jet is here or on the ground, and the object's here, you're going to get a different return as to the vehicle, its identifying characteristics, versus if you're here, even taking into account distance, right? That it sort of almost changes. And a reason that could be the case is because there's a distortion around the object, right? There's a distortion field that is affecting time, the movement of, data returns coming in and out of this environment.